Hello and welcome to a quick lesson on percent of change. So percent of change, what is it? Well, basically, let's say you have an initial quantity. Let's say something costs $5, right? But then the price went up to $6. Percent of change is basically trying to find the percent of the original amount that has changed to get from the original amount to the new amount. That's percent of change in a nutshell. Let's get down to the formula. So the formula for percent of change is the amount of change over the original amount, the amount of change divided by the original amount. So pretty much the difference between the new price and the original price divided by the original price. Okay, so price or amount, actually. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at example one. In example one, you have a change from 45 feet to 92 feet, yes? So again, the formula, let me just copy that. The formula is going to be amount of change over the original amount. Well, it went from 45 to 92, so my original amount is going to be 45. So let me just replace that on the bottom here. That's going to be 45, yeah? And then the amount of change, well, I get that by just subtracting. So 92 minus 45 will give me how much things have changed. So I'm just going to go ahead and subtract. All right, so what I get is the amount of change is 47. That's how much things have changed. So all I have to do is take 47 and divide it by 45. All right, let me go ahead and do that. So 47 divided by 45 equals 1.04444. I'm going to round that more or less to 1.04. 1.04. And remember that this is supposed to be a percent. So I'm going to take that decimal point and move it two spaces to the right, and it becomes 104%. That is my percent of change for this question. Let's move on to the other one. So, for example 2, again, let me just paste the original formula. Percent of change equals amount of change divided by the original amount. So, the original amount here from 362, all right, so that was from 362. That is my original amount. And then my amount of change is just going to be the difference between 362 and 156. So I'm just going to go ahead and subtract. That becomes 12, and this becomes 5. So if I subtract, I'm left with 206. That's my amount of change. Okay? So that's going to be 206 over 362. Again, I just pull out my calculator, and 206 divided by 362 gives me 0.569. I'm going to round that to about 0.57. So this is going to be about 0.57. And remember, it's a percent of change. So obviously I want to take that decimal point and move it two spaces to the right, and this becomes 57%. Now, one thing I would like to point out, in the first question, example 1, I went from 45 to 92. I increased. So the percent of change here was a 104% increase. In example 2, I went from 362 to 156. So I decreased. So in example 2, this was a 57% decrease. Okay? Now, we've covered percent of change. Let's cover a related topic that's kind of similar. It's called percent error. And we can actually use the same formula to try and solve for percent error. So let's move on to an example. Jessie estimates that the weight of her cat is about 10 pounds. Now, Jessie's wrong. The actual weight of the cat is 13.75 pounds. Find the percent error. Well, I'm going to keep the same formula, more or less. The only difference is, of course, instead of percent of change, this is going to be percent of error. Now, obviously, instead of the amount of change here, it's going to be the amount of error. Yeah? So this will be the amount of error. And instead of original amount, this is going to be correct amount. So basically, we want to find out how wrong someone was and then divide it by the correct answer. So for the correct amount, in this case, the correct amount is going to be 13.75 because that is the actual weight of Jessie's cat. So the actual weight of Jessie's cat is 13.75. And now for the amount of error, well, we know that even though the real weight of the cat is 13.75, Jessie was like, nah, it's 10. She was wrong. So how wrong was she? She was off by 3.75. So the amount of error here was 3.75. So all we got to do is do 3.75 divided by 13.75. So let's do that. Divided by 13.75. Boom. Now we get a repeating decimal. 0.2727. That more or less rounds out to 0.27, right? So more or less rounds out to 0.27. And let's not forget that this is a percent of error. So we take that decimal point and we move it 2 spots to the right, and this becomes 27%. Now, there's a reason why percent of error is taught with percent of change. You can see these formulas, they're pretty close to one another. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the formula for percent of error. And now let's just do one more example about it. Okay, so here, first thing, I'm going to go ahead and paste that formula. And now let's take a look at this question. Each week, Mr. Jones goes to the grocery store. Now, Mr. Jones estimates that he will spend $120 when he goes to the grocery store this week. He actually spends $94. Find the percent error. So, just like with the last example, on the bottom we're going to put the correct amount of money that Mr. Jones spends, which ended up being $94. And on the top, we're going to put the amount of the error, the difference between what Mr. Jones thinks he's going to spend and what he actually does. So that's going to be 120 minus 94. That turns into a 10, this into a 1. Okay, 10 minus 4 is 6. Okay, and then voila. The difference in between what Mr. Jones actually spends and what he thought he was going to spend is 26. So if I want to find the percent of error, all I have to do is take 26 divided by 94. It gives me 0.2765. That more or less rounds out to 0.28. Okay, so 0.28. And since it's a percent of error, I move the decimal point 2 spaces to the right to get my percent, which will be about 28%. That's it.